Welcome to Talking About Glaucoma, episode number 33 for December 31st, 2020. I bet you're glad this year is over. I'm still digging through the vaults to post episodes like this gem and have a few more that will go live soon. Email me at podcast@iGuy.org if you would like to be on the show to discuss a topic in glaucoma, or if you have questions that you would like to have answered on a future episode. Check out West Coast Glaucoma on Instagram for some short-form videos that can also be found on my Rob Schertzer YouTube channel. In this episode, I talk with Gus DeMoraes, a frequent guest of the pod. Gus is Associate Professor of Ophthalmology at Columbia University, where he serves as Medical Director of Clinical Trials. When we originally sat down to record this way back in March 2019, he had just presented some of the work he had done in collaboration with Don Hood. This has now appeared on Humphrey perimeters as the 24-2C testing strategy and is becoming a new standard of care. It is based on reports in recent years that glaucoma damage often occurs in the macular area, but missed because the standard 24-2 testing strategy only tests in 6-degree increments. These early central glaucomatous defects are often hidden between the test points. Listen in as I talk with Gus. I'm Rob Schertzer, a Vancouver, Canada-based glaucoma specialist, podcaster, and HealthIT expert, and we're talking about glaucoma. Gus DeMoraes, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So I'd like to talk today about testing, both using 24-2 and 10-2 tests, which is, I guess you could kind of say it's the gold standard. If you were able to do those on your patients all the time, you'd get the most useful information. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could talk a bit about that, and then the new testing strategy that's being released now, the 24-2C.
Yes, there's a long literature going back actually 1969 from Stephen Drance, but more recently revisited thanks to OCT, that shows that the 24-2 is going to miss a lot of macular damage because it has a poor sampling of the macular region. We have maybe 4, maybe 12, if you extend a little bit the edges of it, of points that are actually testing the central 10 degrees of the field, which corresponds to where most of our ganglion cells are.
Right, because the points are 6 degrees apart.
Yes, the spacing is 6 degrees and there are not as many points. So there's a big chance, for example, of having an arcuate defect that just goes between those points. And this is also has been long known because we tend to do 10-2s in patients with advanced glaucoma because we know that from that point on, you have more points in the central field to follow those patients. So it's the same principle now, but we know that can also happen in the earlier stages.
Right.
And adding a 10-2, of course, now you go from a space of 6 degrees to 2 degrees, and instead of 4 or 12 points, you go to 68 points. So you have a much better spatial representation of the function of the macula. The issue, however, is one, we can't perform both tests on all patients in every visit. It's burdensome. Patients don't like to do visual fields.
Right.
We also don't get reimbursed for doing that. And even if we could, in theory, alternate these tests, saying that you do one test, the first visit, the second you go to the 10-2 and so on, you can imagine that you're going to take longer to detect progression on any of them individually.
Right.
While the current recommendations are talking about the importance of frequency of testing to detect progression, this would go against it by delaying even more our time to detect progression.
Right. I guess the classic sort of statistics are if you tested a patient every 6 months, it would take about 4 years to notice a change.
Right.
Now,
depending on the rate of progression and your variability can vary a lot. And again, an alternating is just going to make time to detection even farther from.
Right.
So one of the ways to address it is let's make some adjustments to the 24-2 visual field, add more points in the central area where it's missing damage,
right?
And then we can overcome many of these points I just brought up. And that's what the 24-2C, which is now being released by Carl Zeiss, aims to do. And based on our work and the work of many others, they selected 10 points from the 10-2 that were most commonly affected in glaucoma and added those same locations to the 24-2. But at the same time, it kept all the other 54 points of the 24-2 constant, which has its advantage because if you switch to a different pattern, suppose you've been following your patients for 2-3 years with 24-2, you don't want to lose that data once you start doing a different type of test. So it allows you to still keep those same points to learn, for example, GPA. And in my talk, I showed some examples that you can, in your more recent visit, you can look at those additional points, but still look at the event analysis in the remaining points.
Right. So that's pretty key. So you still have those stats from all the previous tests they've done.
Right.
Because I know that some people do CETA fast alternating with CETA standard testing, and the analysis is missing because it doesn't include the points from the different types of tests.
Correct.
This will carry those forward.
Yes. There's also another upgrade in the software. They now have the so-called CETA faster.
Right.
So as you can imagine, it's even faster than the previous version. And they have some preliminary work showing that it's pretty comparable with CETA standard in terms of variability. So they have been now showing in their GPA the analysis using both strategies. Right. Of course, we need more research on that to better understand. But at least in terms of the locations, again, you have the same the other ones. You just add these new points to improve your sampling of the macular region.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess a lot of this has to do, if we go to the structure and function correlation, there's, it's become obvious now that we need to be testing the macular OCT for patients too. So if we could just talk briefly how that correlates with these 10-2 points and mapping the two together, like some of the work with Don Hood.
Yeah. In fact, Don yesterday presented some recent data from using our database, not yet including the 24-2, but showing how this concept that structure precedes function, or that structure and function don't always agree, it's just a matter of how you define each of them, of course. Right. And one of the points he makes is if you're just using your traditional quadrants of the OCT and your traditional 24-2 MD or some type of hemifield analysis, it's indeed going to be like that. You're going to be seeing a lot of more structure in the beginning. It's not good agreement. But if you now add macular OCT scans, which is, again, that's not like adding a 10-2 because it takes just another minute of your test. By doing that, and if you can do a 10-2, the agreement gets a lot better. In part for the reasons I explained in terms of where most of your ganglion cells are, how many points are being tested in that location. So we can see now a much better structure-function relationship once you incorporate macular scans, mainly the RGC analysis, and the 10-2. In fact, one of the things he showed is that you start seeing a lot of cases that the function is preceding structure, which is not unusual. We see that in practice. It all depends on how granular, how close you look at the scans. You may be seeing a lot of cases that it's actually in agreement.
Right. So now that we're getting our tests better, both of structure and function, we're able to see them coincide.
Of course, we still need to look now with this new pattern how it works. It is still not a 10-2,
right?
But assuming that you're really catching those most important points in the macular, you could, in theory, start seeing better correlation. It of course has implications for early detection, which is one of the key reasons we've been doing that, but also for progression. If you're missing progression in the macula, even with the 24-2, Felipe Medeiros showed a few years ago that the progression in the 4 central points of the 24-2 has the biggest impact on quality of life. So this has implications not only for detection, but also for progression and preserving vision-related quality of life.
Right. I guess that sort of brings back to something Mark Lieberman brought up the other day when that was mentioned, if you're doing a 24-2 on a patient and there's some change in one of those central 4 points on the 24-2, do a 10-2 right away.
Right. For those who still don't have this new strategy, and whenever they ask us, so when should I be doing? Of course, I cannot do it in every visit. This is one of the examples that you should consider. Remember that the variability in the central field is smaller, so any abnormality there, you should really consider maybe true. So if you see a point, even if it's like 5%, 2%, which we don't usually pay much attention, once you do 10-2, you see the big arcuate defect coming out. The other example is someone who has, for example, an intratemporal disc hemorrhage. We know that those fibers project to the macular region, but you don't see anything on 24-2. We have published already, and the San Diego group showed that a lot of these patients actually have macular damage. So those are the circumstances that you're pretty much, there's pretty much a lot of data that allows you to say, okay, I have some evidence here that I should be doing a 10-2.
Right. Yeah, we used to say, well, we still say, if you see disc hemorrhage, it predicts future visual field defect. Well, maybe you're doing the wrong visual field and the defect is there if you look for it.
Yes. The so-called pre-perimetric cases as well. Of course, again, if you have a prior, let's say either an abnormal OCT or an optic disc fold abnormality in the area that projects, or a previous 24-2 that was kind of showing some fluctuation in the macular, the central 10 degrees, you're more justified to go and test a 10-2 until eventually you have some of these new strategies.
Super.
Just another point is that for those outside the US who use the Octopus machine, they have actually, for a longer time, a pattern that has more points in the central field. So this is more of a new in terms of people who use the Zeiss machine. But even the older versions of Octopus have about 10 or 12 more points in the central region. So for those, it's probably not big news for them, but it can be a lot helpful for those who use Zeiss.
And there's also the Metamont perimeters where they can actually be customized and they have extra points in the middle as well.
Right.
Yeah. Any other things you wanted to bring up before we wrap up?
No. Great.
Always great having you on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Talking About Glaucoma is a podcast of indeterminate frequency and duration. It's available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and many other podcast services. Please rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to it, and tell your friends about it so that it can reach more listeners. Follow West Coast Glaucoma on Instagram and Talking About Glaucoma on Facebook. Drop me a line at podcast@iguy.org with your show ideas or questions you would like to have answered on future episodes. Keep informed to prevent needless loss of vision from glaucoma. Stay safe, wear a mask, and get vaccinated. See you next time on Talking About Glaucoma.